Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host. She wants you to send her a tweet saying hi at Leanne Hughes. Leanne Hughes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm your host Leanne Hughes and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. I've enjoyed a great couple of weeks being back home in Brisbane, Australia, having coffees and terrific conversations with some fabulous people and just catching up with emails and with life, which has been really energizing and a nice contrast from the last sort of chaotic few months, I think. And I hope that you're finding the same. I hope life isn't ramping up so much for you and you're getting the time to sort of wind down before the end of the year and getting some time in to reflect and to reset as well. Now, I'm really excited to introduce today's guest to you. His name is Chris Huet and he has a company called Understood. Chris is based in Canberra, Australia, but he travels around this great country and beyond, helping leaders to communicate better. Now, his background and experience are absolutely killer good and exciting, and I love that he's drawn quite different experiences, hobbies, and skills together to do what he does today. Before I really get into his intro, though, I guess what was so cool about this conversation with Chris, and I guess interviewing most guests, is the knowledge that you can extract from that person that they weren't really noticeably aware of beforehand. And what I mean by that is in this interview, Chris shares a really important skill that we can have as facilitators, which is actually stepping out and simply getting out of the way and letting our participants sort of do the work and reflect and share. Now, Chris had this realization through the process of talking, sharing, and articulating what he's learnt in his experiences. And I think this is absolutely the power of reflecting and having someone there to listen to what you have to say. So Chris's goal is to help people speak with the precision of a fighter pilot and the passion of a poet. He's a communications coach with over 30 years experience in the public and private sector, leadership and technical and creative communication fields. Now, he draws on practical knowledge and the latest research to help leaders speak more effectively. Chris has led a fighter jet squadron, negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and performed poetry on stages around the world. Now, as well as being a fighter pilot, successful consultant, and business development manager, he's also an award-winning spoken word artist and two-time TEDx presenter. You can find Chris over at understood.net.au, and I got to say, this guy dresses pretty smart too. So I've uploaded a 2-minute video of us at the end of our conversation reflecting on what we picked up from our interview. You can view that on my LinkedIn profile this week, and if you're listening a year or two ahead, it's actually, where are we now? Mid-December 2019. If you'd like to keep up to date with all of the happenings in first-time facilitator land and get exciting tools and updates sent directly to your inbox, you can sign up to the Flipchart newsletter at firsttimefacilitator.com. And also remember, if you want to continue the conversation when the show is over, you can join the community of over 400 facilitators from all over the world on the free Facebook group. Just search for the Flipchart in Facebook. I've also put a poll in the group about celebrating my 100th episode, which is creeping up. Well, not really. It'll be here very soon. It'll land on the 6th of January. So if you'd like to come along, have a bit of a celebration, you can view that on the Flipchart, and I'm sure I'll pop it in the newsletter that's coming out as well. You can view a link to the group, resources mentioned in this one, over in the show notes at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 97. Now, onto the show. I would like to welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast, Chris Huet. We're running this interview face-to-face in Brisbane. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Leanne. I'm excited, very excited to be part of this.
Yeah, no, it's really great to see you, and we've connected over LinkedIn, and you live in Canberra and you're up in Brisbane for a few days. Yeah.
Yes.
If you've listened to the show, you know I like starting because every facilitator on the show has a completely different career history, and you've got a really unique one. Can you please share with our audience what you do now, but how you got there as well?
Yes, so I'm a communications coach. I help people be better communicators and more connected in their lives to other people. The turning point in my career came about 10 years ago, and I didn't realize it actually at the time. It was in 2010. I write and perform poetry on stage and for other people. And this was my first paid gig performing poetry at a market in Canberra. And I was standing on a wobbly upturned milk crate. That was the stage for the day, in a courtyard, grass courtyard beside this big fig tree, performing for people who were sitting on the grass eating their breakfast or their brunch, and the stalls that were all around. And when I finished, I demounted the milk crate and this woman came up to me, and she was older than me and looked very gentle. And in one hand, she had my CD. I'd recorded a CD of poetry, so she'd bought it from a little merch table that was there. And in the other hand, she had a bunch of pamphlets on Palestine. And she looked up at me and stared me straight in the eye and said, "So, how are you going to use your poetry to change the world?" And I was flabbergasted. I had no response really to that.
No.
I wrote poetry mostly for myself. It's a cheap form of therapy and a creative outlet. And it was only sort of a side benefit or a side aspect of that I performed it for other people. At that stage, I'd only been performing my poetry for about a year and a half. And I was fairly new to it. And it was just like a hobby, a side thing for my work life. In my work life, I'd been in the Air Force for 20 years as a pilot and an instructor and an officer. And when I left that, I first went into consulting, mostly back into Air Force and defence area. And then I moved from there to being a business development manager for a big defence company. And when I joined that company, it was to win a big project with defence, and I won that project. And so I was reevaluating where I was about 3 years ago and writing my CV and doing that thing you have to do where, what's my story? What's my narrative And the thing I realized was the part of my work that I enjoyed the most and everything I did was communicating and connecting with other people. So whether that was teaching people a new skill or it was listening to a client explain what their problem was, or pitching an idea, pitching a solution, whether that was inside a company or to a potential customer. And that's what I really loved. And it was also the creative side, the poetry side, the bit where I connected with other people and shared ideas and shared feelings through that creative communication was a really big part of my life. And I wanted to bring all of that together. I wanted to have the creative and the technical and the business communication and share what I had learned through all of my experience in that diverse experience with other people so I could help them connect with others and be better communicators. So it took me about 8 years. So I started Understood 2.5 years ago, but I finally had an answer for the woman of this is how I use my poetry now to change the world, one person at a time.
And it only took 9 years to figure out that answer.
Yes, yeah.
What kind of poetry? Is it bush poetry or? It's
not bush poetry. I came into spoken word and performance through slam poetry.
Yes,
now,
that's cool.
There is a thing called slam voice, and I wouldn't say that I'm a slam poet in that sense, but my poems are 2 or 3 minutes long, which is how long slam poems are for competition. They usually contain a complete story that take people on a bit of a journey, share something about myself. Not in a bush style, so not in a very strict rhyming, rhythmic style. A lot of it's free verse.
Fantastic. And just going back to, so you were a fighter pilot.
I was, yes.
You've got to tell everyone you're a fighter pilot. I mean, we all aspired to be Tom Cruise when we were younger, so I'm surprised you missed that bit of detail out.
Oh, it wasn't important to the story.
Yeah, actually, good point. And what I wanted to say, when you were telling that story, what you did was you painted a really evocative picture of that scene of you telling the poetry in the brochure in Palestine. And so let's quickly talk about the way that you told that story and the way that you crafted it. You brought in some details. You left out the detail about being a fighter pilot. How do you orchestrate your stories and decide what's important detail and what's not?
It's an interesting one. I want to be able to paint enough of pictures so that someone can picture what I'm doing. And at the same time, that also embeds it in my own mind, because you find that you forget things if you don't share them and pin them to a visual moment, or it could be a sound or a smell. If someone's baking, then that always brings back memories. So I try and paint enough so that I can pin it in a particular location. It's hard. You have to do a bit of trial and error, but decide, is that fact essential so that people can understand a story, or is it not essential? You can leave that particular bit out. Yeah,
because I've certainly, I think we've all been on the receiving end of some stories where there's all this detail, like my friends, cousins, dogs. You know, it's just this excessive data that doesn't really add anything to the story. So I think what you said, and it's hard to sometimes figure out what's important and what isn't. But I think the way that you crafted that, and I like that you use the words, you painted the story, because I sort of felt like I was in that moment of you sharing your poem for the first time. So you've started Understood 2.5 years ago.
Yes.
What was the driver for you starting the business? Because you could have done a lot of what, the communication work internally. What really drove you to start your own thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like the idea of taking on responsibility for something for myself and making a business from what is really important to me. And I felt that I couldn't do that in a corporation, and particularly a business that's focused on supplying things to defence, essentially, and security governments. So it was a different aspect. I could have done what I do, and I kind of did it anyway in the work that I was doing. There's always communication aspects of it, and also mentoring, coaching. But I wanted to focus on the thing that was important for me and make a business that was the thing that was important for me.
The beauty of working internally is that you get to sort of figure this out while you go, and it's not high risk in terms of throwing all your cards in, and you sort of figured out it took you 9 years, but now, minus 2.5.
Yeah.
And now you're here. So what does Understood do? What kind of workshops, presentations do you help clients with?
My business is in 3 areas. The focus for me is to speak in front of others so I can share my ideas and they can see me speaking before them, and coaching. They're the things that I love doing, and I really do enjoy that one-on-one aspect of helping someone with a specific challenges in their own communication and wherever that communication is in their work. But I also run workshops that are associated with that. And sometimes the best work is a combination of workshop and coaching, because that's the best way to learn and embed learning in people. So I love those when you get to work with a team of leaders from a particular organisation, run some workshops interspersed with coaching sessions.
Yeah. And look, it's so important what you do. It's funny, every team or organisation or person I talk to, we're like, what's the problem in your company? And it's always communication. Communication is super broad. Are there common problems that people come to you for coaching for? Or is it a specific thing like confidence, or what are you observing?
For people coming to me, confidence is the most common thing. I get 2 responses when I tell people the work I do. They either say, I hate public speaking, or they say, oh, my boss really needs your help. So
we're always dobbing our bosses in.
It's one or the other. And often the boss doesn't realize it or doesn't want help. So for the people who do come to me for help, it's often that they feel really nervous and they avoid speaking in public. They may even avoid speaking up in meetings, or they always feel like they haven't said the right thing, or they didn't get the message across that they wanted to get across. And a lot of that's related to being nervous. And that would be the most common problem that people come to me with. The most common problem I see when I'm witnessing other people communicating is a certain selfishness or an inward focus, a disregard for your audience. Those 2 things are actually related, because when you start thinking about your audience and thinking about what you are delivering, you actually become a lot more confident if you're a self-aware person. There are some people who are very confident but not very self-aware and are not thinking about their audience at all.
I actually had a conversation with someone this morning about this. She was telling me about her first time presenting and how her focus was. And I think it's a common trap. It's certainly something that I had. Running a workshop, you think, okay, I need to be the best. I need to be the most professional. I need to know everything and make sure I'm okay. In that mindset, though, you're not actually thinking about the audience, and you're getting yourself really wired up as well, putting a lot of pressure on you rather than the focus of how can I help the people? Like, what is the purpose of me even being in front of this room? It's to serve the people in the audience. And when you start thinking about them, you don't get as nervous, or you realize it's not all about me. So how can I best serve them? Which, I don't know, for me, that's every morning if I'm running a workshop. And if I'm feeling a bit, am I prepared enough? It's like, Leanne, just remember the other people in the room. So when you've got people running to you for help, wanting them to help you develop their confidence, what sort of process, or how do you help them?
Well, some of the things you've spoken about, we talk about why we might feel that way, and from an evolutionary psychology perspective, there's the concept that we feel like we're outside our tribe. And whenever we're out standing outside and everybody's looking at us, we feel like we're being judged. And if they reject us, then we'll be cold and won't have food and probably eaten by saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah.
But you're not going to die. To some people, that helps them to remember, oh, actually, I'm not going to die. It's not that bad, and it's all in my head. People are not thinking that about you. But the thing I found when you sort of start talking about that from a psychological perspective, but the thing I've found consistently with the people I work with is that they tell me that it's being prepared that helps them manage the nerves the most. So because they think they don't like public speaking, they always get nervous, they put off or delay or don't think about it until the moment. But if they're doing some work and they actually listen to me and say, think about who your audience is, think about what's going to connect with them, then draft what you're going to talk about, and then rehearse it in your head, be prepared. And they go, you know what? I didn't feel as nervous as I thought I would because I was prepared.
It's so much worse in your own head, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. And this is the thing. I mean, this is why I started the podcast, was because of this constantly, every workshop, just having that in my head. So when you actually deliver it and do it, I like what you said, the confidence sort of comes afterwards, but you've just got to do it first and prepare the right way.
Yes.
So in terms of preparation, what do you do to prepare for running group workshops?
Well, something that I've started and I've found that I need to do a lot is I share parts of, if I'm building a new workshop or I'm coming up with particularly new exercises, because it's always risky and scary running an exercise for the first time in front of a group, is I've connected with a group of friends who do similar work, who facilitate or speak or consult, and we get together and have a couple of bottles of wine and I share a bit of the workshop.
I want to be part of this group. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Well, if I do it in Brisbane, definitely,
yeah.
And so we go for a couple of hours and I say, I'm just trialing something out, see if it'll work. So that's from a broad perspective. For each specific workshop, it's definitely thinking about who the audience is, where they are on that day and what the topic is for their particular need, and running through that and visualizing in your head how you're going to go through the whole day in the workshop with that particular audience.
And do you get people in your workshops standing up in front of the room and presenting in front of others in that environment?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and so how do they respond to that? Like deer in headlights, or some people love the opportunity and other people are sort of hovering in the corner? What do you see?
Yes, yeah. So you get that spectrum. There are people who want to leap out of their chairs and have a go, and then there'll be other people who freeze in the moment. So there is a wide variety, but generally people are there to learn and practice, and everybody gives it a go, and try as much as possible to make that an environment where it's really safe, and it generally is, because everybody's very supportive of each other.
That's another thing to remember, is that we think that people are there to judge us, which is what you said. But I've also found that audiences really want you to do well. No one wants to be in the audience and seeing someone stuff it up.
Yeah.
We're all supporting the person on stage. We all have empathy for the person in front of the room. How did you develop your skills in this area? I mean, I know you started with the poetry. Was that your first sort of foray into this, or?
No, I guess I've always spoken in front of groups. It's part of being in the Air Force and being a pilot, and then a leader and an instructor required briefing groups of people on a mission, debriefing, so running a sort of reflection, which is very important to any endeavor, actually. So that's something that's really important for people who want to improve their public speaking, is always have that reflection time. But running those sort of sessions, talking to meetings or going out in public and representing the Air Force and talking, all of those things. So from essentially when I was 17, 18 years old, when I joined the Air Force when I was 17. So a lot of that was involved having to speak in public.
Yeah. Do they teach you how to do that in the Air Force?
In a very structured way.
I would have thought so. I mean, I'm sure everything in the Air Force is pretty structured.
Yes.
Yeah.
They give you really good tools and a lot of opportunity to practice, but they're sort of more on the structured process checklist sort of approach rather than the making an emotional connection, being vulnerable, sharing something of yourself, which is so important when you're talking to people, particularly people who aren't from your background. If I was talking in the Air Force, I'd stand up in front of a bunch of people who are all from the Air Force. So you kind of got an immediate level of understanding and connection, because they look at your uniform and they say, oh, I know what you do. I know what rank you are. I can place you. I know what training you've got to get where you are. So I trust you. Go ahead, speak. So that structured approach works better in that structured environment. Sure.
Yeah, because I was thinking of previous industry. I was in mining, and we've got supervisors that are asked to deliver pre-start talks at the beginning of every shift. So it's a structured process in terms of there's certain things from a safety compliance perspective they need to go through. But what is lacking is absolutely that connection. I firmly believe that you can build cultures from a really strong pre-start. What I was observing was that people would get there every single day. It was Groundhog Day. The message, they just didn't have those skills, those presenting skills to really engage. And at the end of the pre-start, the supervisor would get approached by everyone. They're going, oh, what truck am I on? And so you could tell they weren't really retaining the information.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm just really curious to see if the Army, I mean, similar kind of hierarchy and structure, whether they gave you those kind of tools. But it seems like it's something that you wanted to do a really good job in terms of engaging, so you tried different things out.
Yeah, definitely. Now that you mentioned it, there were similar things in the Air Force. We had a structure when we go to fly, we brief the same way every time, and we had certain rules or restrictions that we'd remind everybody about so they could be safe. But I would try and pick one or two for today and just talk about them in detail. All you had to do was just list them. There was a rule, a regulation that you had to state them at every time you went flying. But we would talk about, okay, for today, this one is going to be particularly important because we're going to do this. So it made it more connected to the group of people and what we were doing today. So yes, I did have the opportunity to try and make it more engaging and more relevant than it could have been if we just stuck to the
shopping list.
Yeah.
I like that example because it shows that you don't need to do something hugely significant to make it engaging. All you're doing is just pulling out one or two and highlighting certain elements every day, which is simple, right? That's awesome. Now, you can't see us, but you're wearing is it a suit? Is this one of your suits?
Well, a shirt and pants.
Yeah.
I did have a jacket on, but it's Brisbane. So
it's Brisbane. It's really warm. There was an article on LinkedIn, I believe, and it was talking about how you build your visibility as a solopreneur. I wanted you to sort of share a bit about that with our listeners because you talked about fashion, which I loved in that article.
I like vintage fashion and I like being different. So I enjoy putting on different clothes and wearing some colour, which some men do, but it's a thing that sort of men are generally a bit more drab than women.
You can say that.
But that was a sort of an aside to what I was talking about. I had several recent experiences where I was roaming as a poet in a festival in a park, and a couple of different parks in Canberra. So I was roaming around and then performing poetry for people who were there in the park. And the first time I did it, I was wearing a suit because I dress that way, but it wasn't obvious that I was a performer or a poet. And it felt really weird trying to engage people and say, would you like me to do a poem? And they go, why are you offering to do poetry for me? So I then got a bit more dressed up and I carried a sign that said free poems if you offered a poem, to be more visible and also more obvious about why I was there and what I was offering. And I realized that was a parallel to when I first started working. I've always felt awkward about telling people I'm a fighter pilot. It sounds like bragging sort of but I realized that people are interested in that and it's a unique experience for someone from my background and being a poet as well. So
I think you're the first fighter pilot I've met, but then to link in poetry, it's like, wow, what a cool.
There's not many people who do it, and it's taken me a while to get used to accepting that and saying that people will find that interesting, so I should tell people that. So being more obvious about what my experience is and what I bring to my work, which is that unique experience, that a different perspective that someone may not get from working with another public speaking coach or someone who deals in communications. It took me a little while to get used to do that and not feel like I was bragging or big noting or trying to sell. It was more just here to start a conversation. Here's something that I think is really important. And this is why I think it's important. It's because I have this background. And then I found that parallel with performing poetry in the park. I had to dress up and look like I was a performer and say, hey, I'm here to do poetry if you would like to hear a poem. I'm not forcing it on you, but yes, that's why I'm here. So as being more visible and more open about the skill sets and experience that I have that is unique and why I want to use those things to help other people.
Yeah, great. And I heard a quote recently. The quote was, it's hard to see the label when you're in the bottle.
Right.
I really like that. I can see the bottle, but we take for granted our experience and things that we've done.
Yes.
But we've just got to remember that for everyone else, our uniqueness in that intersection of skills that's what makes us unique and would possibly draw the right type of people to work with you.
Yeah. I was lucky to have all of the particular physical attributes and skills to become a fighter pilot in the Air Force. medically I had all the things which...
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right?
It can be hard.
Yeah.
But that was just me. And I became a pilot because of the way I applied myself and the skills that I had. And that was my job. So to me, that's not special. That was just what I did. And I got there just because of who I am. It wasn't anything unusual.
Yeah.
But for other people...
We're like, what? Yeah, that's right. Are you going to watch Top Gun 2?
I think I'll have to.
Just one more question about fighter pilot and I will move on, I promise. But how important is breathing as part of being a fighter, like in terms of like really being present because you're making really quick decisions? And
yeah, that's a good question. We didn't pay much attention to it. The only time we paid attention to it is when we were pulling G. So
that's so cool.
When you're turning rapidly in the aircraft, then you could have, depending on the aircraft you're flying, it'll be sometimes somewhere between 7 to 9 times the normal gravity you have when you're standing up. And to tolerate that, you have to strain your body. And actually, you would do the opposite of what you were doing if you're talking, diaphragmatic breathing when you're trying to get the deep breath deep into your body. You actually take really hard, short breaths and hold it in your lungs because that compressed the blood vessels in your torso, which stopped the blood from running out of your head into your body. So that's
a way of keeping you conscious.
Yes. That's the only time that we actually talked about breathing is when we were turning. We didn't consciously work. It would have been a really good thing, actually.
I understand why. I mean, it's such a thing now. Every day someone's talking about breathing on a podcast and the meditation, the whole movement. Probably it didn't really exist so much 10 to 15 years ago.
Yeah. That's true.
That's why I'm bringing it up. But in terms of breathing in your voice, how do you maintain your voice when you speak? If you're speaking sort of in workshops and then you have to deliver a keynote, your voice is probably the most important thing for your business. So,
it is, yes.
Yeah, how do you train that? How do you keep it going?
I would have to say that I could do better, and I've been lucky, I think. But the training that I do is just practice and keep talking. I don't particularly do warm-up exercises. I don't concentrate on what I'm drinking beforehand. So I'm probably a poor example in that
Thanks
case.
for keeping it real because I know all the theory, like don't drink coffee before a workshop. It's like I am having a coffee. We kind of know what we're meant to be doing, but I think we're the same in that regard.
Yes, yeah. I did singing lessons for a while, which I found really very, very useful in learning more about my voice and being more conscious of breathing when I'm on stage and speaking. But I think it's just that when I rehearse for something, I say it out loud. You have to say it out loud. So I'm either talking in my car or I go to the park that's down the end of the road and I stand in the middle of the park and rehearse out loud. Yeah. And I think just by using my voice, it stays sort of lubricated and used to it. I drink water and try and be fully hydrated when I do perform. Yeah, so I don't drink milk products generally before I perform, but I might have a glass of wine. But
love that. Cool. That makes sense. And so in the morning, like let's say, okay, I imagine you're not drinking wine in the morning before a workshop. I remember a LinkedIn message you sent through. You said that you pack your running gear, but you never seem to use it on the road. Was that?
Yeah. I'm getting better at that now, but I would frequently pack my running gear just so I could carry it to another city and then bring it back home again.
The intention's right.
Yes.
Yeah. And is that all part of your process of sort of warming up your body so you're physically good for the day?
The intention is, yes. I've actually been paying a bit more attention to what you've been saying about your routine and staying physically fit and also physically active. I think there's a lot of value in being awake and up and about several hours before you actually do something like a workshop, rather than get up, shower, go straight there, maybe get a muffin or something if you're lucky when you arrive. Yeah. Being up in the morning and doing some sort of physical exercise, that feeling you have when you've been exercising for an hour and it's 7 o'clock in the morning and everybody else is just waking up and you feel energized and ready for the day, I think there is a lot of value in that.
You feel like you've won the day already.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, right, now I've got a workshop to head into. I sort of talk about it a lot. Really helps me, but everyone has their own way of doing things. So in terms of the attributes of great facilitators, think of, what do you think is really important? What are some attributes you think really stand out in people that you've observed and that you like to use in your workshops? Being
prepared is I think, it's almost a given. You need to be well prepared. You need to have thought about who that particular audience is, and you need to know your stuff well enough that you can guide people through it. I don't think you have to know all the answers, but you need to know what you're talking about. When it comes to the actual day, I think one of the characteristics is to be very attentive and be listening both figuratively and literally to the people who are in the room. And sometimes it's being able to get out of their way. You give them something and give them activities. And I've seen people who've, if I'm sitting back and because I do this sort of thing, you can't switch your mind off and you're sort of analyzing, how are they making this happen? But at the end of the day, you realize you almost did nothing and everybody's so excited and so energized and they had a really great day and they did all the work themselves.
Yeah, I'm sort of laughing. I didn't want to laugh into the microphone because I can see myself doing that. I give an activity and like a minute later, I'm like looking at every table, like, how are you going, and trying to get involved. And I think getting out of the way, no one's mentioned that in 90 episodes. That's key, is giving them the space to actually let them get on with it.
Yeah, and it's taken me a while and I don't know if I'm over it now, but that awkward feeling when you walk around the room and you're standing at a table and go, I'm here, you can ask me a question or involve me in the discussion, and it doesn't happen. And you feel like you're just creeping in on people's conversations and you sort of just slowly back away and go to another table because they're doing it all themselves.
Exactly.
You just give a little bit of direction and
no doubt they'll call you if they need your help.
Yes.
It's funny because I remember in high school I worked in retail and it was like for every minute you were in the store, even if there were no customers, you had to keep busy. So it was like, scrubbing down shelves that were already clean and doing whatever. So when it comes to a workshop and there's that space, I feel like I've got to be doing something productive. Like if they're looking at me, I'll need to make sure I'm shuffling some paper or rearranging a flip chart. So do you know what I mean? It's like that space where you're sort of waiting for everyone. It could be like a 10-minute activity. What do you do to fill that liminal moment?
I just try and watch everybody and also get prepared for the next topic. Think about that. I may play music.
Yeah, nice.
That's something that I've come to learn and come to be more comfortable with. And I think it's a similar concept when you're speaking as well on a stage. People aren't learning when they're listening to you. When you're presenting stuff, people aren't really learning in that moment. They're learning in the quiet period afterwards or when they're practicing it. So when you're on stage, you speak, but sometimes the silences are just as important as what you said because you pause and let people absorb what you've said. Or those moments when you lead people to a conclusion without having to say it, when you tell a story or you give an example and the audience can go, oh, yeah, okay, I realize that. But that happens in their heads when you give them a moment to do the learning. So you don't have to be, as a speaker or a facilitator, it's not your job to be continually transmitting. You break it up with silence or with activities that allow people to learn themselves. And then that's the moment you can just stand back and let it happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
we wish. Yeah. And it's funny you say that because I was talking to, was it Catherine Lloyd back in episode 50, and she was saying you can show one video and everyone's seen the same video, but what they pull out of it is completely different between one person. And it's in that moment of reflection where you find that out. You spoke about how a debrief was really important when it came to flying. So how do you debrief yourself after a workshop? What kind of questions do you ask yourself, or what process do you go through?
Well, I think for any of those forms of activity or communication, and I try and do it for every time I meet or speak to someone. So after this, I'll go and take some notes so I can remember that we spoke about this, and the next time I see you, we can talk about these things again. And did I learn anything, or did you give me any ideas, or did I give myself ideas by speaking?
That's good.
So I'll note down how it went. Did I make any incorrect assumptions about the audience? Did I find out something that I didn't think was the case? What went well? Definitely, it's important to say these are the things to do well. And then also what's something that I can improve next time? And also the thing that I try to be very disciplined is, because I keep forgetting to do it, is write down what were the questions I was asked when you get to the Q&A type sessions or when someone puts their hand up. Because they're the key points that you need to remember, because these are the things that people will want to know next time. Most likely. Sometimes people have esoteric questions, but they'll be the things that weren't included, and you can decide, should I include that? Is that an essential part, or is it just something I'll let someone ask a question about next?
That's really clever. Is it a notepad, or is it Apple Notes or Google Sheets? Like, where do you store all this?
In notebooks, yeah. So I worked with an engineer, actually, it would be 20 years ago now, who showed me this sort of discipline that I've done ever since, and it was fantastic. Numbered every page of his notebook, left the first few pages blank, and put a date on everything, and then went and indexed his whole notebook. So I'll put workshop at this location with this date is on this page, so that if I need to remember I'm catching up with Leanne again. When was the last time I saw Leanne? What did we talk about? I go to my notebook and I do it all by hand because I think that we remember things much better if we write it down by hand.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the reason I got this iPad was for that reason, to collect all these thoughts, but I still have notepads at home. And I love that process of doing that as well, but I'm not as disciplined. So thanks for sharing that system with us, and got to thank your engineering pal for...
Yes, yeah. It is a very engineering approach, but it's fantastic because I'll pull out a notebook that has it's from January to October 2018 or something, because I'll need to remember something and I'll look it up in the index. And I seem to be able to find it much easier using that system than if I tried to search on my files on my computer or search emails.
So true. I've got like 5 different email addresses. My desktop's cluttered. It's like, I don't know where anything is. So it's funny how we go back to the old ways, given all the technology that's available now.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite icebreaker or energizer or activity that it's like your go-to when things need a bit of a lift in the room?
That's a really good question. In terms of icebreakers, I don't like doing icebreakers for the sake of icebreakers unless a purpose of the workshop is specifically team building. So if it's a group of people who are going to continue working together, then getting to know each other is an important part of it. I like having something that is related to the topic. So the meeting people is an ancillary benefit of talking about the topic. So something I'm doing at the moment is I've created a set of cards with a bunch of different words on them. And as people arrive and sit down, they get them to pick a card that appeals to them, a word that appeals to them, and then get them to share with another person when we formally start why they picked that word. What's the reason that word appealed to them? Because I'll be talking about how poets treat language and how you can use some of the poetic techniques to improve your communication, and being aware of the words don't just have meanings, they might have multiple meanings, but they also have a sound and they have an appearance, and the context makes a difference. So if you hear a word after another word, those two words might chime together. That makes a difference. And also everybody has certain connotations and connections with certain words, and you need to be aware of that because you might be able to take advantage of it, or you might not be aware that you say this word and that makes this group of this particular audience think of a certain thing because of some pop culture reference or something that's just happened in the news. All of those things are reasons why people might pick a certain word because, the first time I heard this word, it was in a poem my dad read to me, or I picked proud because that's how I'm feeling today because I actually did this thing today. And
you get some really great stories that resonate with that person.
Yes.
Oh, that's such a cool idea because I've heard of the picture cards, but I love that you're bringing in your poetry through the importance of words and the way that you describe the use of words. To be honest, I throw words around without really, emails, I'm pretty good. Like I will think really about it. But when I communicate, if you haven't noticed, if you're listening, happy to throw words around without really considering the proper word for the context. Actually, to be honest, only when I'm traveling internationally, I really think about what I really wake up to is my use of Australian slang.
Yeah, right.
The other day in Hong Kong, I said the word screw up and they're like, what is a screw up? Actually, a British guy asked me, not even a Cantonese person, it was someone from the UK. What is a screw up?
And when you stop and think about it, you go, that doesn't make any sense. Why do we say screw up? Means to get something wrong?
I don't know. If you really think about the language, if you really look at the English language, there's a lot of confusing things going on there. So
we all talk just by saying the words that basically come to our mind. The more we read and listen and talk to other people, the better we'll choose words, but we still just say the words that come to our mind. The ones, though, that I think that we really need to be important when we use is abstract words. And a lot of the work that people like you and I and other people, the facilitators who listen to your podcast, we deal in the knowledge worker space, the knowledge economy, and we deal with abstract concepts all the time. So something that's abstract is something that you can't touch or see or taste or hear. You can't experience it with your senses. So words like management or leadership or even facilitation are abstract in the sense that you might say, oh, I know facilitation when I see it, but what you think is facilitation could be something completely different from somebody else's idea, and you only really know that it's facilitation when you experience someone facilitating and they say this is facilitation. And a lot of management speak is abstract. It becomes
corporate bingo.
It becomes meaningless, and it has a different meaning for every person. So that it's very, very difficult to use it in your communication.
Yeah.
You just need to be aware of those abstract words. And if you do have to use abstract words, which we generally all do, then give an example. Make it real for the person. Tell a story about someone exhibiting this particular value, or our organization's culture is this because it happens when somebody does this.
Make it real.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And metaphor is great. Stories are great. Visuals are great.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So you work with a lot of people that are developing their confidence in this space. What advice would you offer to a first-time facilitator? Someone starting their journey?
Yeah, said it before, and I think it's not a particularly exciting thing, but be prepared. For someone who's facilitating for the first time, don't wait until the morning because you're avoiding it or it seems too big. Don't just pull out the PowerPoint presentation that someone's prepared for the thing and just run through it or read it off the slide. Yeah, think about who you're going to be facilitating for. What's the space like? What time of the day it is, and what is the specific purpose on that day? Why are you presenting, running whatever workshop it is? Start thinking about those things in advance, and that will make you more connected with the people in the room, and it'll make you more relevant and interesting, and also that makes you feel less nervous because you start taking that nervous energy, and instead of catching it inside your head, you're sending it outwards to the people in the room. Yeah. And that comes from preparation.
Exactly. Those are really great prompt questions as well, which cover like the environment, time of day. I love that you brought that up. It's significantly important. Morning session versus afternoon. There's that hard act to follow, that line. So just see where you are in the run sheet as well. Chris, if people would like to find out more about what you do, where can we send them?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn. I have a business website, so understood.net.au, which I'm in the process of updating, and hopefully when they get to hear this, that there'll be an updated website. Yeah. They're the primary places that I present and put material out there. I am on Twitter as comms_coach, and my poetry, I perform under a pseudonym, CJ Bowerbird.
Oh, nice.
So there's a lot of my poetry is on YouTube.
Cool.
And on Spotify. You can listen to me on Spotify as well.
Oh, well, we have to send through the links. We'll link them to the show notes.
Yes, yeah. Okay, I'd love to.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'm sure people are very curious about that. First poet, first fighter pilot. That's the first for everything, even though we're over 90 episodes, you know. When I started this show out, everyone's like, how are you going to run at least 100 episodes on this? And I'm like, there's so many ways to break this game down. And I love new perspectives on the way that we facilitate. But I think a common thread in what you brought up is preparation is number one all the time. It wins every time.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your time and for appearing on the show and making the effort to come to Brisbane. It's been great meeting you.
Thank you, Leanne.
Hey, thanks so much for sticking around. You've reached the end of another episode of the First Time Facilitator podcast. Connect with the show at firsttimefacilitator.com or follow me on Instagram at Leanne Hughes to find out what I'm up to during the week. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone who will also appreciate the insight, and make it easier for yourself and subscribe to the show in your podcast player of choice. Thank you so much for listening, and chat to you next week.